Hello, statistics students. Here's another video on the binomial model. And in this video, we're going to be looking at an example of how to interpret the mean and the standard deviation. So this example talks about Toronto driving test. In Toronto, Canada, 55% of people pass the driver's road test. Suppose that every day, 100 people independently take the test. Letter A, what is the number of people who are expected to pass? So that's our expected value, which is mu, and that's given by n times p. Since 100 people independently take the test every day, the number of trials is 100, and the probability of success is 55% of people pass, so that's 0.55. So our expected value is 100 times 0.55, which is 55 people would be expected to pass. Now, standard deviation is a little bit harder to calculate. That one is the square root of NP times 1 minus P. So we have N is 100, P is 0.55, and then 1 minus P is the probability of failure. 1 minus that is 0.45. Taking the square root of that value, (100) times 0.55 times 0.45, and then we want to take the square root of that, which gives us 4.975. And we'll go ahead and estimate that to be 5. Okay, the standard deviation is 5. Now, what does that mean? That means we would expect 55 people to pass, but there's this variance of 5, so we wouldn't be surprised if 60 people passed or 50 people passed. And in fact, maybe even something a little bit more than that. In fact, letter C says after a great many days, according to the empirical rule, on about 95% of these days, the number of people passing will be as low as blank and as high as blank. So remember, the empirical rule says that 95%, that contains 2 standard deviations below and 2 standard deviations above the mean. So if we're talking about a mean of 55, then we could go as high on 95% of these days, 55 plus 2 of the standard deviations. So that's 10 or 65. And we could go as low as 55 minus, we go 2 standard deviations below. That's 55 minus 10, which is 45. And then letter D says, if you found that on one day, 85 out of 100 passed the test, which you consider this to be a very high number. So remember, we're not typically surprised when we get numbers between 2 standard deviations from the mean, but when we start getting further than that, 85 from 55 is 30 away. So that's 6 standard deviations away from the mean. So this is quite unusual. This is high. It is well out of our 95% interval found in part C. And this concludes this video on the binomial model, example 7, and how to find and interpret the mean and standard deviation from a binomial experiment.